Season 2, Episode 9, Antiheroes and Redemption Arcs with Amey Zeigler. Amey Zeigler is an award-winning author of romantic comedies and mysteries. Her mainstream romance, The Casserole Dish, won the runner-up in the Roan for Sweet Contemporary Romance. Her 10 years of theater training in college and high school inspired her to narrate her own books. She spins stories with humor, charm, and heart, often with a dash of action and adventure. When she's not writing, she is teasing her 3 kids, globetrotting with her husband, for book research, of course, or trying new things. You can find her at www.ameyzeigler.com or at Amey Zeigler on Instagram and Twitter.
Hey, we are super excited to have everybody here today. Thank you for joining us.
We're very excited to have Amey Zeigler on again. We had you on last season to talk about themes and villains. We're kind of continuing along the same vein of characters with this interview, but we're going to talk about anti-heroes. But before we kind of jump into that, do you want to plug your books so our listeners know where to find them?
Oh, sure. I mean, nothing like a little shameless self-promotion here. My name is Amey Zeigler. I write a sweet romance or like what I refer to it as comedic or humorous women's fiction with a strong romantic bent under my regular name, Amey Zeigler. And then I just started my new YA fantasy pen name, which is A.E. Zeigler, and I have a backer kit coming up here in September. And so I'll be launching my new series, The Stitch Binding Chronicles, and Weave of a Thousand Lies is coming out. So I'm super excited. The early reviews, my ARC readers have come back and they've all loved it so far. So I'm super excited to start something new. It's super exciting. And thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, and I really appreciated being invited back. That's really generous of you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, we loved our conversation with you last season. It was just so much fun, and you just have so many insightful thoughts, and I just feel like our listeners could use it again. So I thought it'd be great.
Well, thank you.
Even if they can't, I can.
Well, I hope you learned something today, and we can all learn something together, I feel like. So this is fun.
Okay, let's start off. Amey, we're going to talk about antiheroes and redemptive arcs. We're going to start out with antiheroes. So do you want to kind of define what an antihero is a little for us?
So to me, antiheroes are very different from heroes. I mean, they are the main character of the story, the person that we're usually following around. But usually heroes are noble, they have some flaws, but the flaws are not things that we find really socially objectionable or anything. But when you look at an anti-hero, they actually are really flawed heroes, and usually they are at odds with society. So they're either making a statement against society or they're doing something that is against societal rules. One of the biggest defining characteristics I think that they have is their own selfish interests. And we're going to talk a little bit about this and how I define it and how I think that separates antiheroes from a lot of other classes or archetypes of characters that we're going to talk about today. But their actions are still noble. So it's a really conflicted and a very interesting type of character because they're doing good things, but their motivations and their desires may be selfish. So I think this is going to be an interesting talk tonight. So
yeah, I've always just been a little confused with how antiheroes work, because I've always been the person where it's it's the good guy or the bad guy. Who am I rooting for? But antiheroes just are that gray area.
Yeah,
so
they're so intriguing to me.
See, I love anti-heroes, and I have a whole work in progress centered around them. So they're some of my favorite characters.
Awesome.
So we'll go with our first question. So in what genre context do you think antiheroes best fit in?
So, I'm glad you asked this question because I actually think they fit into a lot of genres. I think when a lot of people think of antihero, they think of Walter White in Breaking Bad, like these kind of living on the edge kind of characters, the ones that are breaking the rules. but doing something for a good, more or less good reason kind of a way. But I have a list here of romance, historical. I have a YA fantasy here. I have one that's a cartoon, actually, middle grade. I have one that is a romance again, science fiction fantasy, action adventure, another cartoon, and then lots of comic book heroes or antiheroes. But I think you can find them across all genres, and I think they work really well across all those genres. And I can talk about some examples if you want me to lead into some examples right now.
Yeah, go for it.
So the first one that I thought of was one of my favorite characters that I love to hate reading when I was younger, and I read Gone with the Wind 1,000 times, is Scarlett O'Hara, right? People love her. Like, I remember I went to somebody's house and they had this collection of plates of Scarlett and her, her 19-inch waist or whatever, in that green dress and her big bonnet and, just all of the things. She did some really terrible things in that book. And just to name a few, in case you haven't read Gone with the Wind or you're unfamiliar with the story, she marries her rival's brother to spite her love. She doesn't care about the Civil War, which for a lot of people, that was like, that's that against society kind of an attitude, right? The Civil War was going on. Everybody was talking about it. And she's like, well, I don't care about this stupid war, right? Like that was super big. She married her sister's beau, Frank Kennedy, who owned a lumber mill in Atlanta. And she did that to save Tara. And she did a lot of things with that lumber mill that made just people get really upset. Like, she drove her own wagon and managed the store herself, like the lumber mill herself. And then even at the end, she marries Rhett. And it's not because she loves him, but because she feels like he will take care of her and Tara. Now, arguably, I think Scarlett, people say, oh, well, Melanie was supposed to be the heroine of that story. But if you look at Scarlett, she really takes over that story. And I think a lot of it, and this is when once I give all these examples, I'll kind of break down what I feel like these all have in common so that we can kind of replicate this in our writing. But here is a historical romance, right? Like, I would consider it a romance, even though, in the end, Rhett goes, frankly, my dear, I don't give a but I feel like this is a historical romance. And here we have Scarlett, who is an antihero. Another one that came to mind, a story that I read, I think it's William Makepeace Thackeray who wrote Vanity Fair, but Becky Sharp, very much, she comes from a lower class background. She's a lady companion, and kind of like Scarlett, she flirts her way to the top of high society. Paul Atreides, and some people will argue this, but he actually isn't a hero. He actually, I mean, the Dune movies right now are really popular and looks very heroic, but in the books, he's actually, you kind of see the machinations of his mom and the, God, what's the name of the cult? Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, COVID brain. But he kind of leans into that Messiah persona that his mother has manipulated to put him in place in power, right?
You can probably hear like my baby in the background, but yeah, just going along the lines of like Dune not portraying it yet. I think they're like slowly setting it up, but the books definitely don't paint him in the heroic light.
Right. Yeah. And that was Frank Herbert's like whole point, is that he's not the hero of the story. So I'm hoping that the movies continue to move that way. I kind of felt like that second movie definitely did, when he was all like, throwing Zendaya under the bus and decided to marry the Empress's daughter, right? Like, that's where we were going in the movies. But in the book, it definitely, Frank Herbert even said that this is what this book is about. So another one that you may be familiar with is Shrek. Like, Shrek goes on the journey to rescue Fiona, but it's all for selfish motivations, right? Like, he wants to get his swamp back. That's why he goes. That's what he, the whole thing is so that he can have his swamp back. And even though that changes a little bit for, as he starts developing feelings for Fiona, but it starts out very much, and he's even said a couple of times, I'm not the hero of this story, right? He doesn't pretend to be heroic. He doesn't feel heroic. He doesn't do anything heroic. His actions are pure, but his motivations are all selfish. So here's one from middle grade. If you're a middle grade writer or reader, Artemis Fowl. Like I loved these books. Do not watch the Disney movie. Okay, if you've seen the Disney movie, throw that from your brain and just go and read these books. They are genius. I actually met Owen Kofer in person. And I have a signed copy of Artemis Fowl, but he is hilarious in person as well as in writing. But in Artemis Fowl, this young, I don't know, I think he's like 12 years old. He is a conniving criminal genius who wants fairy gold. Like he literally is just greedy. And he has this wonderful adventure. All the elves and the leprechauns, not the elves, but yeah, I mean, I think there's elves in it, but leprechaun, and it's just a fun adventure. But he definitely is like doing it for the wrong reason, at least at first, right? Another one, this is an oldie but a goodie, is Rick Blaine from Casablanca. So he says the whole time, I'm staying out of the war. Like, that's why I'm here in Casablanca. I'm just here with my bar. I'm not taking sides. And what he does is heroic, but he didn't start out with purely, saintly reasons. He loves Elsa, and he was doing it, I think, for her, but really he was doing it to protect his business and his reputation up until, I feel like the very end. Here's one of my favorite antiheroes that you guys might be familiar with is Han Solo in Star Wars.
Oh yeah, he's a good one.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite, right? All the way down to "I love you." I know. I heard he ad-libbed that line, and I think it was just perfect. But he's there for the money, right? He was there for the money, at least at first. And by the way, he did shoot first, so he's definitely that antihero. Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean, he's just there for his own selfish reasons. In the first movie, he wants his ship back, right? He's trying to get his ship back. But everything that he's doing, even though what he's orchestrating ends up being good and benefits other people, he starts out with selfish reasons. Gru from Despicable Me. He even starts out as villainous, although he's kind of a poke the poodle villain, I would call it. He's not really a very villainous villain. But he does end up being the anti-hero. He has minions, he has, fart guns, he has all these things, but he starts out with kind of selfish reasons, and then of course has this kind of redemption arc. And then just for all you people who are into superheroes, they have a lot of I had a whole list of anti-heroes and supervillains, or in super comics, the Marvel comics and DC comics. Eddie Brock is just one that comes to mind, but there's Hellboy, there's just a whole list of stuff. My husband is a big comic book reader, and so I know a couple of them. But I actually wanted to talk a little bit about Batman, because he was on a list that I saw, but I actually think that Batman, I would actually classify him under a vigilante archetype, not an anti-hero, because I actually feel like his motivations are really selfless. I feel like
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, do you? Okay, good. Because yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, along that same context, the character, I'm trying to remember his name. He's another Marvel character, another vigilante. Okay, I'll come.
There's a lot of those. That's
Fair.
But it'll come to you. It'll come to you. But a lot of those superheroes, I feel like Batman is set apart a little bit, because even though people are like, oh, well, he's really dark, he's really edgy, he fits a lot of the anti-hero kind of archetypes. But the reason I think it's different is because he, as a person, doesn't benefit from what he's doing. He's going out and he's rescuing all these people, but he doesn't do it for the fame. He doesn't do it for any kind of notoriety. He's just doing it to keep the streets of Gotham City of clean, crime-free. He's trying to give back to the community.
Yeah, I'd say that's really emphasized too, because he really protects his secret identity, and he definitely doesn't do it for money or anything either.
He doesn't need the money. So, did you find that other one that you were thinking of?
No, it's killing me. So, he's in the he's they had a Marvel series with him, but it was on Netflix.
Was it Daredevil?
Daredevil, that's
Like
what I'm
Daredevil,
thinking.
yes.
Because
Daredevil is
he
a
is,
super.
yeah, he's such an interesting character because he's so brutal and like
Yes.
so like willing to go really far.
Right. Where a
Um,
lot of the heroes like have a code. Like
yeah,
they'll
they
be
have a
like, "Oh, I
code.
don't kill people," you know.
Yeah, but his intentions are still pure.
Right.
Like his so yeah, I think he can kind of be compared a little
Yeah,
bit
to Batman.
with to Batman
I
because of
agree.
that. But
And
yeah,
isn't he a
he's
lawyer? Isn't that his day
mhm,
job? Yeah.
yeah,
And he's blind. Yeah.
and he's blind.
I
Yeah,
have heard. No.
he's a, yeah. I watched a few seasons of the series on Netflix.
Oh,
Got a little dark for me. I had to stop, but it was actually really
oh,
good.
oh, cool,
So
cool.
yeah,
I do feel like these kind of characters make for really compelling characters. And so I'm going to kind of run through like what all of these have in common so that when you guys are writing
yes,
your anti-heroes that you can have some, I won't say that this is like a checkbox, but this is kind of what I put together just from reading stuff online. So charisma is a must. Like if you notice, like all the people that I mentioned, Scarlett O'Hara, Becky Sharp, Paul Atreides, Shrek, Artemis Fowl, Rick, Han Solo, Jack Sparrow, Gru, Eddie Brock, they have a certain amount of charisma and they have a certain amount of chemistry with others. And I think that's important. And so when you're writing, I've read something that somebody said that audiences want chemistry with other characters. Like it can be romantic chemistry, but it can also be banter. I mean, we watch bromances, movies like Dumb and Dumber and like all these bromance movies because we like the chemistry of the characters. We like family movies because of the chemistry between the characters. So I think for an antihero, charisma and that chemistry with others is a must. Their motivations must be clear and known. But this is true of all characters. I mean, like if you're going to write a character, right? This is simple character theory study right here. And they must be understandable even if they are not likable. Like there are some things that that some of these characters do that take it to an extreme. Like you were talking about Daredevil, where you're like, wow, I do not agree with that. Like one of the things I was thinking about was one of the characters I was thinking about was Walter White. I don't agree with making meth and selling it to people, right?
yeah,
But you can that's bad. Like as a society, he would be arrested, right? And if he was your neighbor, you would report him, right? But as we go along and we watch him struggle and, we understand, the reason and the conflict that is internal to him, we understand. And even if we don't like what he's doing, we're kind of secretly rooting for him, which is really an interesting place as, somebody who's a law-abiding citizen, and all of a sudden we're rooting for somebody who's doing something completely illegal, which is the genius of that show, quite frankly.
I want to make a comment. I think that is just such an interesting. I've always thought that was so fascinating with the way that like media and like story is portrayed, is that like we can root for people that we wouldn't normally root for because of the way that it's presented. And so the anti-hero just sticks itself in that gray area so hardcore. And it's so interesting that like we kind of find ourselves sort of rooting for the anti-hero even as they go downward,
Right.
It's compelling. I think it's sometimes a good reality of what life is,
Right. I really do. And I think it makes it so seeing these characters play out in television and books and in other media, comic books, it really makes us check like our own morals. Like I feel like these kinds of is it right for Batman to go around killing people at night or, scaring no, it's not. But you want him to do it because you understand everything about them. And you're secretly rooting for somebody who's doing something really bad, which is super weird as somebody who's, like I said, a law-abiding citizen. So the other thing that I think that makes characters interesting in this situation, particularly these antiheroes is to show them being torn by his choices. If depending on how sympathetic you want to make them, like if we saw Batman, suppose we wanted to show a softer side of Batman, even though he's not really an antihero, but he's a vigilante. But suppose we wanted to see a softer side, then we would have him wake in the morning after he's turned back into Bruce Wayne and think about the things that he's done and be like, do I have to keep doing this? Or to ask Alfred, is this the path that I have to take? Like, have him be torn. You should have seen the guy, because then it makes him more sympathetic. If you do not want a sympathetic character, like I'm not sure that some of these guys are very sympathetic. You can just say, hey, he's not torn. This is his moral code. This is what he's living up to, and he's decisive, and he doesn't, he's not torn at all. So you get to decide sympathetic you want to make him. And then the last thing that I think you need is a backstory, why he acts the way he does. And this can help you establish the motivations and making them more sympathetic. And just, as I always say, show us. I mean, you can have a conversation where this is revealed, but it's much more interesting if you actually show us in the story of how he becomes how she or he, like, there's women antiheroes too, like how they become how they are. So the other thing we kind of wanted to talk about tonight is a redeemable character. So I kind of wanted to transition, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One of my favorite antiheroes, which I was kind of talking, and you may not think she's an antihero, but I think she's an antihero, is actually Emma, Jane Austen's Emma. At first, she's kind of doing everything for selfish reasons. Now, you could totally argue, and somebody else could totally argue, that she's not an antihero, and I would totally agree with you. Jane Austen herself said that she wanted to write an unlikable character, like somebody wouldn't like Emma, but Emma is my favorite. Like, I really do love Emma, because she is kind of this anti-hero. She starts out as this kind of, like, she does a lot of things for selfish reasons. Oh, look, I'm good at matchmaking. Look, who could benefit from my from my matchmaking abilities? But then she goes on to actually have a redemptive arc, which I think is really cool. And so I just wanted to talk about redemptive arcs. So if you wanted to ask some questions about redemptive arcs, you can ask away, because I have some stuff on redemptive arcs too.
Oh man, redemptive arcs are the best. So one of the things, I'm just going to ask my favorite question. What are like some core attributes that you think are needed in a redemptive character and a redemptive arc?
Yes. So when I think of the most redeemable person, because I think that story is about redemption. Like, a lot of story is about redemption. And so I don't think that there's anybody who is more redeemed than Dickens' Scrooge in A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
And so I kind of looked down and I was like, okay, what are these attributes and how did he make this story? And then if we have enough time, I want to walk through actually a modern movie that I found that actually talks about this, and it kind of, and I can kind of illustrate that a little bit more. So first of all, we see how awful. So number one, we look and see, like, the author, the writer needs to show how awful this person is. The second thing, you need a touchstone character who explains what we do not see. He can cut through or see through the smokescreen and actually knows this person well and defends this person. They can see past the hurt or the wound. And this person can actually see him trying to make amends. But at some point, the redeemed person, the flawed person, must have a total break, even from that touchstone character. We call it the dark night of the soul, or that rock bottom that we have in story. That everybody has given up on him because, he was kind of trying, but maybe not for the right reasons yet. He was trying, but it wasn't enough. And at this point, he even gives up on himself. And then at 6, my 6th point would be that we see him overcome that self-doubt, the years of bad habit, the temptations, the old friends, or whatever it is that's pulling him down, to prove this touchstone character and to himself that he has changed. And then we actually have to see him make those amends and changes. So I just got back from Aruba last week, and on the way home, I found this 2009 film called Ghost of Girlfriend's Past. I had never seen it before. I didn't see it when it came out. It only had like a 5.8 rating on IMDb Movies, because I looked it up because I was like, how come I've never heard of this movie? It has.
I think I've actually watched this.
Oh my gosh, because I was like, where did this movie come from? I've never heard of this.
I think I've heard of it.
It's Matthew McConaughey. It's Matthew McConaughey and Jennifer Gardner.
Oh boy.
Okay. And it's like a retelling of this like Scrooge kind of this Scrooge redemption arc. So I'll try to go through the thing really quick. When it opens, Connor Meade is like the ladies' man. Like, he is of the worst sort, almost to the point where I almost turned it off, because I was like, oh my gosh, he is such a jerk to these women. Like, he broke up with 3 women on a conference call, like all of them all together. And he was like, sorry, ladies, I'm with this girl now, and like brushes them off. And I was just like, whoa, this is like, it was almost too much for me for him to be redeemed. He goes to his brother's wedding, since like this, not only a confirmed bachelor, like he's like, I will never get married, but he is totally open with his simultaneous intimate partners lifestyle. Like, he's like, this is the best, and getting married is for the pits and everything. And he's slept with most of the bridesmaids, and everyone thinks it was a mistake to have invited him, because he like pulls down like decorations and throws. Marriage is a sham. But even as he acts, pulls these tantrums and all these things, his brother Paul defends him and reveals that their parents had died, and basically Connor had raised him. So we see Paul, this touchstone character who can kind of see through this smoke screen that he's throwing up. He sees the true self. I thought it was going to be the girl, quite frankly, because I know that this is a romantic comedy. It was pitched as a romantic comedy. So I thought it was going to be the girl who was the touchstone. Jennifer Gardner plays Jenny.
That's kind of what I thought too. It's like surprising.
That's what I would expect.
It's always the love interest,
It's always right. And Jenny did know him, and Jenny did believe in him, but I thought it was fun, interesting, like as I was kind of taking notes, because I was like, wait a minute, this is a redemption story. So I started like mentally taking notes. It was Paul. And so the darkest moment is actually a little bit later on. I'm kind of skipping ahead, but the darkest moment is when Paul says, you know what? Everyone was right. I shouldn't have invited you. You ruined the wedding. My spoiler alert, my fiance is now breaking off the wedding, and you have your wish of like everybody being miserable, and you did it. Thanks a lot, Connor. And so we have to kind of see him come back from this. So like the Christmas Carol, a ghost appears and says, hey, here's the consequences of your actions. You and your brother are both going to be lonely. Like, you're going to die lonely old men. And so his girlfriends come back, and we kind of see a little bit into Connor's past. His parents died. His uncle raised him, and his uncle was just like a freewheeling, live your life for the moment kind of a guy, and taught, little 13-year-old Connor, or I think he was 14, really bad habits. Like, he taught him wrongly. And so all of this, bravado of being, hey, we gotta have like sex from here to there, is actually from his uncle. And so once they try to correct that understanding of what is most important and what you really want, he goes back and he was like, remember Jenny? Jenny loved you. Jenny gave you your first camera. She believed in you. She waited for you. You had your stupid rules of, sorry, I can't wake up with the same woman, or whatever. And she also sees him for who she really is. But I love it that in this story, she had already discounted him as lost and had moved on, because it gives her a lot of power in this movie. Like, she's not still like clamoring after Connor. She's like, nope, I've dismissed you long ago and I moved on. And so it's the brother that's always like defending him and helps him through this process. And so like the ghost of Christmas Past, like the Christmas Carol, he's shown like the consequences of his actions, and he really does truly try to make it right. Like he goes above and beyond to make the marriage happen. Like he brings back the fiance and apologizes and like does all this stuff to like make that happen. He apologizes to Jenny. He, breaks up with all the girlfriends and tells them, nope, I'm sorry, I've changed my ways. I'm going to be, and I think he even proposes to Jenny. Like it was like a huge change. And so I thought that was a very interesting redemptive arc, because I wasn't sure that they were going to be able to redeem him. I mean, Matthew McConaughey is super charming. Yeah, it's just so funny because my daughter and I, we literally have this joke. We joke that the way to make any character redeemable is to make them good looking. Like she loves that they made Voldemort or Tom Riddle good looking in Harry Potter, because they're like, oh, now he's redeemable. I'm like, you cannot redeem Voldemort. She's like, oh girl, fan fiction can. And I was like, ah.
Oh my gosh.
So
does it count though? Because at the end he's not very handsome. I mean, like I feel like right? You could argue that point that he's not redeemable. Yeah. Like,
right? I agree. Like when she said that to me, I was just dying of laughter because I was like, wait, what? So
I think that kind of mirrors the arc almost, starts out okay and then just goes downhill.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, which is also an interesting one of these days I actually want to write like a Davidian fall where somebody starts out really good and they just make bad decisions, and they just like the bad decisions keep like making them until they turn into like the villain, right? They'd be a prequel or something, but I just find that arc super fascinating. But yeah, to make somebody redeemable, Matthew McConaughey, I mean, it was really easy to make him redeemable because he is so charming. But honestly, to me, until he made amends, until he said, I am sorry, I was wrong, I am going to change, I don't felt like he was redeemable. So I feel like that is a key to having those redeemable villains or redeemable characters. Now yeah. So now you can have redeemable villains too. I didn't really talk about that too much. I don't have any great insight into that other than just do the same things that you do with the redemption arc, and I'm sure you can redeem a villain.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, me. So in the books that I'm working on, I kind of like laid it out the other day. I kind of honestly start with 3 villains the very beginning.
That's how many you need.
And I'm ending up redeeming one awesome. At least.
But so, he's like your first villain, right? Yeah, and I feel like that kind of works because, like, if you look at Zuko in Avatar: The Last Airbender, he is season 1's villain. Like, yes, like obviously the Fire Lord's kind of like the overarching villain, but he is like very much an antagonist towards Aang and the rest of the team.
Always, yeah.
And
that is. Go ahead.
Sorry, that was kind of where I got the idea. I like my whole intent when I started working on this series was I really wanted to do a really good redemptive arc, but I was pretty mad my main character, or my second main character, who I was gonna do, ended up being a lot nicer than, which is stupid. I was pretty mad about it, but I decided maybe I'd make like a evil brother. So spoilers to the book that you're going to read in like 80 years. Just kidding.
We'll read it anyway.
So, but yeah, I thought about with Zuko that he's the bad guy in the very, very first season. And he's like, he starts bad and then arcs all the way to good. And it's like, you have to have the full arc. Yes. You can't like start in the middle. Or else it's just not powerful enough. You have to see them completely on the other side.
Yep.
In order for it to be successful.
Lows.
Yeah. In order for it to be satisfying,
Well, I do find redemptive arcs some of the most satisfying. Mm-hmm. And like that Zuko arc is so satisfying.
Yeah.
And so, it's just soul filling that people can change. I think that is, I think that's a great message. People can change. The
Hmm.
people that we used to be, we can change and we can become somebody better. And I think that is a message of hope that fiction brings to people. And I just think it's just really powerful, like you said.
Yeah, I think it, and it just like, especially in the world today, it's hard
Yeah,
to see the good people because there's just a lot of bad people. And
right.
so it's refreshing to see that somebody that can be completely evil can change back. It's like, oh, whoa, okay. The world isn't
It's
actually the world all the
right.
time.
Isn't horrible. It's
Yeah.
awesome. So
Yeah.
excellent. Well, that's kind of all I had. I do have some challenges. Do you guys want to hear my
Okay.
challenges or?
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right.
Megan, do you have any other questions or
Oh,
anything?
yeah.
No, I think jumping right into the challenges is great.
Okay, good.
Oh,
Okay, go
perfect.
for it.
Okay, so the first one is just a little story exercise that you can do. Like, think of a villain that you've read or watched or something, and just make like a little story twist where you add a touchstone character who believes in him and then create a redemption arc with that plot. So,
That's a
um,
good one.
I love that idea just because, I mean, I think a lot of fan fiction is based off of that. So,
Mhm.
that's one of my challenges. The second one is to think of an antihero. Think of what, take your hero character and kind of take some of those flaws and turn them into an antihero and see what selfish motivations that they can have instead of positive motivations and see if you can create an antihero that is just as compelling and not necessarily likable, although he can be likable, um, for your work in progress. So that's my
Awesome.
challenge.
I love both of those. Those are awesome. That like it kind of makes it feel like it's a little more possible instead of
Yeah.
starting from scratch because you're just
Yep.
kind of tweaking a few things.
Well, I think these writing exercises are so much better. I mean, a lot of writers get their start writing fan fiction and asking the question, what if? So if
What if?
you,
Yeah.
if you have a villain or somebody that you're like, man, I wish they could have been redeemed, um, give it a shot. Like, try it
Hmm.
out. It doesn't even have to be like a huge story. It can be a short story. It can be a couple of chapters. It can be a couple of scenes. Anything to get your creative juices flowing for your next, for your next project, for your next idea.
Awesome. That's
So.
perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for being on with
Well,
us. It's
thanks.
been a treat.
You guys, thank you guys so much. And thanks for inviting me back. You guys are so wonderful and taking time out of your day to help other writers, get prepared and ready, as they're in the middle of that publishing craziness. I know how it goes. So we've all
Yeah.
been there. So it's
Yeah.
awesome what you guys are doing.